Hello, today I'm excited to share a game-changing mod I've developed that might have broken the keyboard hobby for me. I call it the Bumpon O-ring Mod, and it basically allows you to O-ring mount a gasket mount keyboard using only bumpons. It makes a huge difference, and I honestly think it beats every other mounting style, even regular O-ring mounts. To show the Bumpon O-ring Mod, I will be building this DIY O-ring board from a $30 acrylic case. It's hard to describe how good the typing experience is, but to put it into perspective, I daily drive this board more than any of my premium boards. In fact, I enjoy it so much that I bought a second one to build for this video. Let's take a look at what we need for this board. The key component is the case. It's a case only stacked acrylic gasket mount 60% on AliExpress that I bought on sale for 40 Canadian, which is around 30 US. The color options include gloss yellow, butter yellow, matte pink, gloss green, light blue, gloss blue, matte blue, and purple. I have the purple here, but I recommend one of the transparent colors like this one, since it makes the build much easier when you can look through the case. I prefer the matte texture of the solid color though, so make your best judgment. The case also includes a PC plate and some gaskets. We won't be needing these. Next, some O-ring built with a universal plate and PCB. Make sure the PCB has a left USB-C port and O-ring cutouts. The cutout positions don't matter. Then a medium-sized O-ring, preferably above 50A. Last but not least, at least 14 of the 8x2.5mm bumpons. Now we can start the build. First, we will be treating the case as a single piece, so make sure the screws are tight. The case doesn't include feet, so we will use our bumpons. Now take a look at your PCB and choose which cutouts you want to use as mounting points. For a consistent typing feel, I suggest 1 near each corner, and maybe 2 more on top if you want less bounce. In general, avoid these large cutouts that are bigger than the bumpons we're using. Align the PCB above the case along the same side and use the USB-C port as a reference point. Stick the bumpons on the side of the case at the cutouts you selected. Make sure they are touching the bottom case. Repeat for the bottom side. If the acrylic layers feel uneven near any bumpons or the bumpon just doesn't stick well, put a bumpon on the bottom case to prevent it from sliding down. Next, install the O-ring and put the build in the case. The transparent acrylic is really helpful here since you can look through the bottom to readjust the bumpons as needed. Unfortunately, we can't do that with this board, so we can only eyeball the positions. You can kind of test it out by pressing down and seeing how much it flexes on the bumpons. The problem is that the build fits too loose right now. It rattles when I shake it, and it falls out when I flip it upside down. What we can do is take a bumpon and stick it upside down all the way inside any of these gasket slots. Take another bumpon and cut it in half. Stick it upright under the first one with the flat side aligned with the case so that nothing is poking out. The bumpons should be touching each other and this ledge shouldn't budge when you push on it. This is a fastener that prevents the build from falling out while allowing easy assembly. We'll place 3 more fasteners evenly around the board. Now when putting the build in, make sure you insert the bottom between the fasteners and the mounting points. Push the top down near the fasteners until you can hear 2 clicks. That means the fasteners and the build are secured. I'll demonstrate it again, this time with some keycaps off so you can see it in action. To take it out, you can push the keycaps towards you and lift up. If that doesn't work, you can leverage the gasket slots and pry it out with the back of the tweezers. You can see how the fasteners snap into place above the plate. If you did it correctly, you should be able to press the keys next to it and not feel any interference. Otherwise, you probably need to move the fasteners further into the slots. And the build is now complete. The resulting boards have similar sound signatures to O-ring mounts. It's clean, consistent, and full. There's no hollowness and you hear almost none of the plastic case. Just listen to this with a GMK spacebar. So good. The typing feel is even better. Since the O-ring isn't fully compressed by friction or the case, but rather sits on bump-ons which act as gaskets, it feels moderately soft and bouncy. If I compare them to the Sanity, which is a high-end O-ring board that costs 10 times more, I can feel that I'm typing on metal points, so there's no give despite the soft O-ring. In contrast, the acrylic boards feel like I'm typing on rubber or silicone. This is what makes it the most comfortable mounting style for me. What I find interesting though is that these acrylic boards have quite different typing experiences, which I think is due to the case tolerances. I noticed that the purple case is around 2mm thicker, so the fasteners don't secure the build as tightly. This might be why the purple one is more clacky and flexy, while the blue one is more creamy and firm. So far what I've shown in this build guide is just the basis for the Bumpon O-ring mod. The sheer amount of customizations you can do with the Bumpons is honestly mind-blowing, and it's only limited by your imagination. You can try using different mounting points to find the right amount of flex, or experiment with various bump-on sizes. You can even change it back to the original mount if you don't like the result, as the mod is non-permanent. I want to show a variant of the mod which doesn't require O-ring cutouts on the PCB. You can either use these 12.7 by 3mm bump-ons cut in half, or these 5 by 2mm bump-ons for the mounting points. For brevity, I'll just demonstrate the smaller bump-ons. The PCB itself will rust on them, so place them at spots where there are no cutouts. Now they're in place, and I can just put the build in like before. The only difference is really the feel, where this is slightly firmer than the original and softer than the bigger bump-ons. A big question is, what type of boards are compatible with a Bumpon O-ring mod? First of all, the board has to use gasket strips, since half the mod is about the fasteners. There are exceptions, of course, like if the friction fit is tight enough, in which case any tray mount case is fine too. You should be able to use any layout that has an O-ring compatible plate and PCB, such as 60% and TKL. The PCB options are very flexible, as we learned that the O-ring cutouts are optional, and either USB-C or JST can work. I'm pretty positive you can even fit the Wooding or the EC60. As a sanity check, I tested a Bumpon O-ring mod on almost all of my gasket boards. They are the Auger 60, PLA 60, and the Sango 60. For now, I'll just provide an overview of them, but I might make a separate video explaining the various techniques I used to make the mod work. First is the Auger 60, which uses the Sanity build. This was very simple. I only had to make the mounting points because the PCB perfectly fits in the bottom case. You also might notice that the PCB uses JST, which is a little different. Next, I modded the PLA60 to use the purple build. This was honestly challenging since the case is much larger than the PCB, so I had to pull out all the tricks to secure the build. There are side alignment bump-ons, in fasteners, and some stacked large bump-ons for the mounting. The wing keyless blockers are both good and bad since they act as fasteners, but also make it harder or impossible to insert the build without opening the case. Finally, I have the Sango 60 with the blue acrylic build. I basically applied what I learned from the PLA 60, with the addition of front alignment bump-ons and mixing the mounts on the top and bottom. What's interesting is that the bottom gaskets help secure the fasteners, so we don't need to cut any bump-ons. I really like how these turned out. They feel much better and more consistent than the original gasket mounts. The PLA 60 and the Sango sound a little hollow around the mods, but I could probably play around with the bump-ons for a tighter sound profile. Customization is very important when it comes to the Bumpon O-ring mod, which you can see in the different implementations here. Since making this mod, I haven't been interested in mini keyboards anymore, as I'm starting to question why they're worth spending hundreds on when I can get an amazing typing experience from a $30 case. Anyway, I highly recommend trying the Bumpon O-ring mod, whether by making this cheap acrylic O-ring 60 or converting one of your gasket boards to O-ring mounts. I look forward to your creations.